we're going to do a quick review of social theory. Although occasionally there'll be guest theories like chaos theory or something from psychology, most of the time in Intro Soc, we're going to stick with these big three, which have been around, well, they've always been around. They've been the basic assumptions underlying a lot of the good Soc that was done at the end of the 1800s, but they were first really put together as a cohesive set of theoretical bodies in about the 1940s. And they do a really good job most of the time of explaining the way a lot of things happen. We're going to start with functionalism. The functionalist perspectives assume that societies are a whole, made up of integrated parts that work together to keep the society going. A functionalist is just amazed that large groups of people can cooperate to get anything done, like raise kids who mostly aren't criminals, or get to work on a highway, or put breakfast on the table. The fact that with all our disagreements and conflicts and conflicting interests, large groups of people manage to get anything done together is an absolute miracle to functionalists, and they spend a lot of time trying to explain how each of those amazing little miracles happen. Functionalists start with the observation that if a society doesn't meet certain basic needs, that society is not going to continue. Those basic needs are things like survival, that is, food and shelter and not being eaten by wild animals and not being frozen to death, etc. New members, because if the members you've got die out and there are no more, that's the end of the society. Socialization, which is teaching people how to be productive members of society and cooperate with other humans. Distribution, that's getting stuff from producers to consumers. Order and organization, that's settling differences and organizing cooperation and agreeing on rules, etc. And morale and motivation, which is keeping people caring. In order to meet those basic needs, every society has a system of behaviors, organizations, customs, relationships, assumptions, beliefs, and these patterns of behaviors and relationships are called social institutions. Every society has to meet the same basic needs, but societies organize themselves in different ways in order to meet those basic needs. And the bigger and more complicated the society is, the more social institutions you have to do that. If a social institution, like, say, the family, meets a basic social need, like survival, or morale and motivation, or socialization, or reproduction, then we say that that social institution is functional. A functional is a beneficial outcome of something a society believes or does, or how it organizes itself. On the other hand, if a social institution, like education, fails to meet a basic social need, like teaching the skills people need in order to participate in the economy, then we say that it is dysfunctional. A dysfunction is a behavior or a belief or a pattern of relationships that makes the society less successful and less likely to survive. The thing is, all the different parts, all the different social institutions fit together and work together. And if you change one, there's going to be compensating changes or chaos in the others. The next perspective is symbolic interactionism. Symbolic interactionism assumes that human behavior is shaped by the ways people define themselves, other humans, and the social contexts around them. That's just a fancy way of saying that what people do isn't based on what reality actually is, but what the people think reality is. So what symbolic interactionists are interested in is, what do people think reality is, and how did they come to that interpretation, and how do they spend their time trying to convince each other that their interpretation of reality is correct, and how often does that work? This is the Thomas theorem. What is believed to be real is real in its consequences. You'll probably be seeing that again. That's symbolic interactionism in an itty-bitty nutshell. Now, a key concept in symbolic interactionism is the idea of the symbol, because symbols are how people communicate with each other in order to disagree, support, construct those ideas about what is real or important or good or true or everything. Symbols can be anything that communicates a meaning. Symbols may be ambiguous, context-dependent, or variable. Here, we have a whole bunch of very similar symbols that communicate very, very different ideas. And symbols can communicate very, very complex layered ideas. What do these houses tell you about the people who live there? Every day, all the time, we send symbols by our clothes, by the choice of words we use, by how we speak to one another. What kind of information is your clothing communicating about you right now? What does your car say? What kind of car is cool, or sexy, or dangerous, or dull? And why does it matter if you have a mommy car, or a muscle car, or no car? According to symbolic interactionists, people make their choices based on what they believe about themselves and the world. Some choices are better than others. Some beliefs about the world are not consistent with facts, and some beliefs about the world are actually destructive. Some widely held beliefs lead to choices that are dysfunctional for the society. And this is quite a quandary, isn't it? Symbolic interactionists point out that if you can change how people see the world, if you can change what they believe is good or real or true or inevitable or necessary, then you can change what they do. The last basic theoretical approach is conflict theory. Conflict perspectives assume that societies are composed of groups of people who join together with other people they perceive to be like them in order to compete with each other for scarce resources. In any given situation, what conflict theorists are looking for is who is in control and who is being exploited, oppressed, or robbed. And yes, in large, complex societies like ours, conflict theorists assume that there is always someone who is being taken advantage of. Originally, conflict theory only divided society into two groups: people who owned sources of wealth, like factories, farms, stores, ships, and so on, and those whose only source of wealth was their labor. That is, they sold their time by the hour and worked in factories or on farms. Soon, however, sociology came to realize that the owner-worker relationship is not the only way to form interest groups. People can form groups on the basis of race, gender, age, religion, region, occupation, ethnicity, class, sexual orientation, rural versus urban, red state versus blue state, type of business you are in. It just goes on and on. We're terribly creative about how we divide up into groups and find outgroups to hate. Conflict theorists believe that people seek out and ally themselves with people they believe are like them. People form groups, and as groups, try to protect their interests. What sort of resources do people compete for? Well, wealth, obviously, high-paying jobs, assets like stocks and bonds, ownership of loaned or factories, and so on. They also compete for a good life: nice houses, safe neighborhood, good cars, good schools, quality health care, respect, freedom of travel, freedom of worship, safe food, police protection, peace of mind. There are lots of good things, and not everyone has equal access to all of them. According to conflict theorists, people and groups who have wealth and power will use that wealth and power to hold on to their advantages, and also to make sure they get the most rewards. Conflict theorists assume that social institutions involved in social problems are controlled by, and are for the benefit of, groups that have wealth and power. When a social institution fails to meet the needs of poor or powerless groups, conflict theorists believe that this is not an accident or just some kind of unfortunate social dysfunction. They believe that the flawed institutions are that way on purpose because they do benefit some people, and that they can't be reformed but should instead be completely replaced. These different social theories are not always in competition with one another. Sometimes you can use several at once to look at different aspects of the same social problem. Sometimes, though, the theories are mutually exclusive. And some theories do a much better job of answering social questions than others, and none of them is the best approach for analyzing all kinds of social situations. So you're going to have to be familiar with and comfortable with and switch back and forth between all of them. The end.